This is Viterbi Voices, your chance to hear stories about research, classes, student life, and more.
Directly from our students, faculty, and other members of our engineering community. All right here at the USC Viterbi School of Engineering.
Welcome back into Viterbi Voices. My name is Paul Ledesma. I am the Director of Undergraduate Admission at the USC Viterbi School of Engineering.
And my name is Audrey Roberts. I'm a senior studying mechanical engineering here at USC.
And we're here with a newbie to the podcast world. Chris, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chris. I'm currently a junior studying civil engineering with an emphasis in building science, and I'm from Woodland Hills, California.
All right, Chris. Now, a question I ask everybody when they get onto the podcast, are you a big podcast listener?
You know, I'm actually not. It's something that a lot of my friends have been very much into and trying to push me towards. I've never really tried it, but I think that, I don't know, after recording my own, I think I should definitely kind of dive in and listen to some because I think it's a pretty interesting take.
Yeah, definitely. Now that you're a podcaster, how are you doing in your semester, and how's everything going with you in general?
Pretty well. I think that last semester was a lot of kind of figuring out how to handle the virtual setting. And now this semester I've kind of just, got into a schedule, and I think I'm just kind of dealing with it a lot more and I've been able to adapt. So the semester's been going pretty well for me.
Well, that's great, buddy. Well, good. So Chris, tell us, what's this episode that you bring to us today?
Yeah, so it's about virtual design competitions, and I specifically reached out to people that have worked with engineering design competitions that have been mostly done in person and use a lot of traveling to go somewhere, or maybe use technologies that would be normally done in person, and basically how they had to adapt it to the virtual setting, how both the companies and teams that are doing the competition and then also the students, how they adapt to it themselves, and also just seeing whether there's some aspects of the virtual that they would actually want to be kept moving forward, if maybe a hybrid setting would actually be a better choice for these kinds of competitions.
Well, that's exciting. It's definitely a question that we're echoing a lot somewhere. I don't know if that's you, but that's exciting. It's definitely a good thing that we're getting questions about, which is how do these hands-on elements translate to the virtual world? And of course, it's not the same, but I think that people will be surprised as to what types of opportunities do exist. So why don't we get out of the way, and we'll hand it over to you, Chris, to lead the rest of this conversation about design teams during the pandemic.
Welcome to the Viterbi Voices podcast, Dominie. Today we're going to be talking about virtual design competition, specifically the work you're doing for the Make-A-Thon competition. But before we start that, I thought it would be good to do an introduction, your name, your major, and hometown. So why don't we start with that?
Yeah. Hey, Chris. So my name is Dominie. I am a senior studying biomedical engineering, and I'm from Kahului, Hawaii.
Great. Thank you. So with that introduction, I kind of wanted to start with a description of what the Make-A-Thon is and what exactly you participated in.
Yeah. So the Make-A-Thon, well, I guess I should first start by saying that I am president of the Associated Students of Biomedical Engineering, which is a student organization in Viterbi, and it does exactly what its name suggests. It provides professional and academic resources to biomedical engineering majors. Our largest event of the year is our annual Make-A-Thon, which is a medical device design competition. And in the past 5 or 6 years that we've put this on, it's been in person, and it's a 30-hour event, very intense, where 10 teams of undergraduate students, typically composed of biomedical engineering majors, but also can encompass people from other majors. They have 30 hours to brainstorm, 3D model, and then actually fabricate a prototype for a device that solves a real world challenge. For example, last year, the challenge was to build a post-stroke rehabilitation device that enhances physical therapy compliance. And then this year, we had to restructure the entire competition to a virtual format. So as president, I led a committee of 11 people, and we started from scratch and really thought about how we could pull this off without the fabrication spaces that we have on campus, and teams would no longer be working together. And so we were able to actually do this. So it happened February 17 to 21. So we extended the competition to actually take place over 5 days instead of 30 hours, because we felt like people would not want to be on Zoom for 30 hours straight, like in the past, where we'd have everyone in one room and they'd be working on it for nearly like 30 hours. Some teams wouldn't even sleep. So this year we spread it out. We had a few really exciting guest speakers come in the beginning. So we had Dr. Carla Pugh from Stanford University School of Medicine. She was our keynote speaker, just meant to inspire the students to innovate. And then we partnered with Engineering World Health, which is a global health organization that educates biomedical engineers from developed countries to build technologies for developing countries and regions where there's low resources. And so the prompt or the challenge this year was to improve upon the oxygen delivery pipeline. And you can do that in many ways. You can improve transportation. They have tanks. And this is specifically for low resource areas across the globe. So there's oxygen tanks. You can work with oxygen concentrators, which basically just takes ambient air and puts out high concentration oxygen. And so teams, that's the challenge that teams were assigned, and they had access to mentors, and they eventually just came up with really mostly just 3D models using computer-aided design programs to present to the judges.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a really interesting prompt. So with the competition, is the prompt given right at the beginning, like at February 17th, or is the prompt given earlier in time and then you have time to talk with your mentors and gradually work through it?
Yeah, so the prompt was given on February 17th. So it was a Wednesday night. And the way we did it was the Thursday. So the next day is when Engineering World Health, the CEO, as well as one of the engineers from Engineering World Health, came in to talk to the students more about what are challenges that low resource hospitals face and how do we design devices that could really serve the needs of these low resource hospitals and patients in these low resource hospitals. And then teams can work on their device and design all the way until Sunday afternoon when they present to the judges. And during that time, they have access to both graduate student mentors as well as alumni who are working currently in the biomedical industry.
Great. I also wanted to touch upon how adapting to the virtual setting specifically affected the team and how you think you guys were able to handle the virtual platform without letting it disrupt the competition too much.
Yeah, so I think the hardest part about the virtual environment is that you can't capture the energy that comes with being in person and working together in person, having access to 3D printers and laser cutters, and just having everyone in one room and feeding off of each other's excitement about the challenge. And so that was really tough for us to sort of emulate, and as well as it was hard to, I think initially we were trying to figure out how are we going to keep teams in it, like how are we going to keep teams going and to the finish line. And I think what helped was we used Zoom and we had all the teams in breakout rooms throughout Saturday and Sunday into the final presentations. And we had mentors going through the rooms constantly, as well as we would do this thing, which I think really helped, was every day we would check in. So one Make-A-Thon committee, we call ourselves Make-A-Thon committee, the ones who plan the event. Every day, one of us would go and check in with our assigned team. So we had a team that we had to kind of look over and make sure they were doing okay. And so we checked in with the team and made sure that they were given all of the resources they needed, and also that if they had any problems like working together, or they had problems with their design, we could help figure out how we could, support them. So I think that was huge, like making sure there's a constant line of communication with the teams.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's really important because I also faced a similar virtual design competition situation, and it was definitely difficult to kind of keep the team engaged when you're all working. We used Microsoft Teams for the competition. It's hard to have people, be in constant discussion because people would be talking over each other. So sometimes we had to do, breakout rooms also. So I definitely understand the importance of like keeping everybody engaged. And then I also wanted to ask, just kind of in general, like maybe just the different pros and cons, like were there actually any pros that came with using the virtual setting, do you think?
So one pro is that before we would have teams prototype, right? So we would have to provide and order ahead of time all of these materials in order for teams to, use and actually build the devices. And because there's that material constraint, our challenge had to be super specific. You have to develop a device that is a post-stroke rehabilitation device. Here's the problem. Post-stroke patients are having trouble wrist and or hand impairment. So the problem statement's like given to teams, and it's not so much they're trying to figure out the problem, the clinical need. They're just trying to figure out, how do I design a device that will meet the functional requirements? This year we could have more flexibility, and our challenge was so broad. It was like improve upon the oxygen delivery pipeline, and we gave them resources on ways they could do that. But at the end of the day, they needed to figure out, okay, what's the problem? What setting do we want to choose? Do we want to choose a hospital in Rwanda? Do we want to choose a hospital in Guatemala? There's just many different choices that teams had to make. And because of that, we incorporated some entrepreneurial components. So we actually, for the first time, had a workshop on entrepreneurship, like how to build a device, or not build a device, but build a pitch. And then also how, if you wanted to actually take this device to market, how would you go about doing that? So we could incorporate that kind of entrepreneurial aspects that in past years we had not even thought about due to material constraints.
That's great. So basically you would say that you think that the virtual setting allowed maybe a little more flexibility with the competition and offering more options for what you could explore.
Yeah.
With your answer. Then you could also expand a little bit more on that entrepreneurship aspect that you used in the competition and what specifically you were able to add to it.
Yeah, so in the past, we focused a lot on the design and the device. And this year, we incorporated not only in the workshop, but also we gave them kind of final presentation guidelines. And then we also gave them the rubric that judges would be using in order to evaluate their presentations and their designs. And we put more of an emphasis this year on the presentation because we feel like communication is a huge part of entrepreneurship, but it's also a huge part of being an engineer. Like you have to be able to communicate your ideas to people who might be kind of far removed from the problem. So that's one way. And then, like I said, the other way was just as an entrepreneur, you're always part of being an entrepreneur. Actually, a lot of it is trying to figure out what's the need, like what are the pain points, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and is it even a real problem? And so teams had to go through that exploratory process, and that's definitely entrepreneurial.
Fantastic. I guess so overall, as a kind of wrapping up question, I just kind of wanted to ask, what do you think the legacy of virtual design competitions are? What do you think that the effect this will have on the future of the Make-A-Thon, maybe perhaps for next year?
Yeah, I think going back to your question too about what could we introduce this year that we couldn't in the past, I think the idea of our virtual competition evolving to be not just a competition, but also part like conference. Like we had guest speakers from, one was from Stanford, so she was up in the Bay Area, and then one was from Engineering World Health. She actually lives like on the East Coast. And so this idea of being able to bring in speakers from all over, from different parts of the medical device space, innovation space, that's like really, really doable with virtual competitions and virtual events. And so, next year, even like not just virtual competitions, but just virtual events in general, that might be here to stay. As far as, what if we want to have access to someone who's across the world? Like, we can do that now. We have the infrastructure, we have the platforms to do that. And so I think that might be here to stay. Now, I think what was missing in the virtual competition was the prototyping, the fabrication, the hands-on aspect, besides just the 3D modeling. I think the hands-on of like actually like using the 3D printer and seeing your result in hand, that's something that I think I'm really looking forward to students having that opportunity next year.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that a hybrid is a very real possibility with these kind of design competitions, because I think you're right that with the virtual platform, we really kind of utilize technology to our best advantage and how like we can use it to communicate across the world.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing I'll add, I actually was talking to some of my e-board members about this, is that I think what the virtual environment did for us is it made us restructure and start from scratch. And so it made us be more creative and not just go with what traditionally our organization has done. Like across the board, we've had to really rethink everything. And because of that, it gave us such a unique opportunity to improve, not just things like basic things, like how we are communicating with our members and how we are, giving the design challenge prompt to our members and what resources are we giving them. That stuff we like had to be more creative and we improved on. And I think that is all also there to stay.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think that definitely COVID and the virtual platform was a new precedent. And, as engineers, it's really our job to problem solve. And I think that that's what COVID was able to bring out of us.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dominie, for taking the time out of your day to talk to me about the Make-A-Thon and how you experience the challenges and both, the pros and cons of virtual design competitions.
No problem. Thanks, Chris.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Viterbi Voices podcast. Last time I talked to Dominie about the Make-A-Thon competition, and this week I'm going to be talking to Natalie about the ASCE Design Build team. Hi, Natalie. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Just trying to get through midterms and all that,
Great. Definitely very relatable experience. Before we start talking about virtual design competitions, I kind of wanted to start with an introduction, name, year, major, hometown.
Yeah, for sure. So as you said, my name's Natalie. I'm currently a second-year student studying civil engineering with an emphasis in building science, and I'm from San Diego, California.
Great, thank you. So just to begin, I kind of wanted to start with a general explanation of the ASCE competition. So could you just kind of give me a general description of the competition? So was it in teams?
Yeah, so the way the competition is run, so typically in a regular year, you would travel to Reno and you are put onto a team based off of your school. So each school can compete multiple teams. There's a bunch of problem statements. For example, like there's a design build problem or a mixed use problem and a pre-construction problem. And hypothetically, let's say one university has enough people to compete a team for every single problem, then you can compete as many people as that is. But typically for USC, we have enough people for around 6 teams per year. And so that means when we go to Reno, we have 6 teams competing on 6 different problems.
Great. So then you competed on the design build team, correct? And what does that specifically entail compared to the other teams?
Yeah, so design build is, I would say, one of the more challenging ones, just because the way it differs from the rest is that, let's say, for example, another team, they would be given a site and with a building already put in place. All they have to do is come up with the construction plan for it and how they want to like demo or how they want to schedule the project. But where design build differs is that we are not given a building. We're just given a empty lot, like empty site. And 2 members of our team who are the architects would then have to design the building during the competition itself. So anyone else who's kind of depending on those designs to be done can't continue their work until it is. So it's a lot of working simultaneously instead of already being given the materials you need. So that's where it's a bit more challenging and difficult, I would say, just because you have to like stay on your toes and work as you go.
I definitely agree. I also competed in this competition with Natalie. We were co-captains for the design build team. And I specifically took on the project management role, as Natalie knows. And that means I kind of spearheaded producing the transmittal letters and kind of the more of the information that would be regarding the client and communication with the client. And then Natalie, could you talk a little bit more about your role on the team?
Yeah, so this is my second year competing. The first year I was estimator. So that means I had a list, a spreadsheet of all the materials and possible equipment we would need if you were to demo a site and then construct a building. And I had to put in estimations for how much everything would cost. For example, if our architects designed 20,000 square feet of concrete, I had to put in the estimate cost of 1 square feet and multiply that by 20,000. And that's kind of just like a very simplified version of that. It's like 20 pages on the spreadsheet with like 20 materials plus listed on each page. So it's a lot that goes into it. And obviously the architects aren't going to have everything for you. Like they're not going to tell you how many columns you need in the building. They're not going to tell you how many steel bars you're going to need. So you kind of have to just use common sense and also the knowledge you have of construction to put that information together yourself, while also staying very in budget, because that's like one of the necessary things to do. You can't go over budget or else your client will not want to hire you. And then for this year, I changed roles. So I was scheduler, which is another kind of like nitpicky role. The role that I played, what you have to do is you schedule the project. It sounds self-explanatory, but you have to learn this programming called P6. And then you have to put in all the activities you would need. Like, for example, you have to construct level 1, but then level 2. But then within that, you have to do everything like putting in concrete and then putting in your supports and then raising your steel beams. So it's like a lot of little activities. And then you place a duration on them, then put them in relation to each other. Like this activity must happen once this one has already been completed. Like, for example, you can't start on level 2 until you finish level 1. So that's kind of a relationship you need to create. But yeah, that was my role this year as scheduler.
Yeah, definitely scheduling is a very difficult role, and I definitely think you stepped up this year with that one. So I think our whole team appreciated that. So you did mention before that the competition takes place in Reno or Sparks, Nevada. So could you kind of go into the length or the timeline of the competition while we're there?
Yeah, so last year was the only year I got to go in person. This year's virtual, but the in-person timeline, it kind of looks like we left Thursday morning. Like when I say morning, I mean morning. It was like 4 a.m. We all had to trek over to Cap Hall and get into a bus, which was a lot. But the bus ride's super fun. It's quite a few hours, but then so we get there around Thursday, maybe around 2 p.m. or something like that. We settled in, and so you get to stay at a hotel, which is really cool. The CMAA, like USC CMAA, pays for it. You don't have to put anything out of pocket, which is really helpful. So then you get put into rooms based off of like your team and what you're comfortable with. And then they have like an opening ceremony where all the schools, all the teams are invited to this big dinner. It's actually really crazy because you want to get like a pretty good table, or like at least a whole table for your team. So everyone's crowded together, standing at the entrance. And then when they open up the partition, everyone bolts. And like, if you don't run fast enough, you're going to get run over. But that was really fun. And then so you like grab a table, they do like a little raffle. And last year, actually, Chris won an iPad in the raffle, which was so funny. I remember everyone freaking out. We're like, no way.
That's the first time I've ever won anything in a raffle ever. So that was a big surprise for me too.
It was great. It was so fun. We were like, no, USC is going to get called. And we did. So thank you for repping us.
Yeah, I appreciated the iPad.
Yeah, so then you have that dinner. And then the next day is competition day, where you're going to wake up probably like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. You're going to be given your competition packet. And then you have 17 hours of just working. So you're going to be in a hotel room with your 5 other teammates. So every team consists of 6 members. You're going to be in a hotel room with them. It's separate from where you're sleeping. It's a separate workroom. And you're just going to be sitting there for 15 hours, putting together this entire construction plan starting from like demo and then pre-construction and then construction and then closing out the project. You have to put all of that together. And then you have to run downstairs into the lobby and make sure you submit it. I believe it was like by 11 p.m. that night. You submit it and then you think you're done, but you're not, because the next day you have a presentation where you're going to go up in front of the company that's sponsoring your problem. For us, it was Swinnerton Construction. So we'd go up in front of Swinnerton industry professionals and present our problem. But so we stayed up after that. We worked on putting the presentation together. And then the next day you're presenting, but you don't know what time you're presenting. They kind of raffle that off. So like if you're later in the day, you can probably go to sleep and then practice presenting in the morning. But if you're like one of the first in the day, then you have to pull an all-nighter and then maybe crash after you present. So then after the day of all presentations, you can go watch other people's, and then most likely your school will come and watch you just to support you. And then the next day, so it's like a 4-day thing competition. You're going to commit a lot of time to it. So the last day is the career fair. And this career fair is amazing because I wouldn't say guaranteed because like it's not 100%, but like more than likely you're going to get an internship offer as long as you're like networking and showing that you're really committed to this industry and learning more about it. And so you just walk around to various booths. There's so many companies that are there and they all want to talk to you. And especially if like USC, if they were an alum there, they especially want to talk to you. And so you just go around, you hand out your resume. Certain companies will even interview you like right there on site, which is really cool. And then you just get all those connections and then you head on back in a bus again.
Yeah, that career fair was definitely fantastic. I actually ended up getting 3 job offers from it. So it definitely was very helpful in that sense. But going off of that, kind of like the general timeline, I kind of wanted to bring it more to the competition this year and kind of ask how you think the competition had to change or adapt to the virtual setting and to COVID.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges was having to garner interest in a competition where it's a lot of like sitting there in front of a laptop in a regular year, but now you're sitting in front of a laptop without the parts of being able to hang out with your team and being able to do all the things that kind of make the competition worth it besides like potentially getting an internship. And so that was something I know USC struggled with a lot. So like for CMAA, like Construction Management Association at USC, I am Sparks co-chair. So Sparks is what we call the competition. So that was kind of like where my jurisdiction laid, where I had to put together the teams and make sure we had at least 2 teams that we could send to send quotation marks to the competition. So that was something we struggled with a lot. And unfortunately, we didn't get to send as many teams as we wanted to, but that's just kind of how this year was. And you have to accept it. I feel like that's how it went like across the board for all clubs and majors, that there was a lack of participation because like rightly so, everyone's exhausted being on Zoom all the time. But that's what they kind of had to figure out, like different ways to get students interested. And I think they did a pretty good job. I know they had prizes, like they had raffles, like if you were to submit a video clip for the introduction, then you can be put into a raffle. And then they also just use the idea of like, if you need an internship, you're probably going to get one as a way to get students involved as well. But the way the competition looked different is that instead of like being in person, you had to do it on either Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So I was like sitting here on Microsoft Teams for an entire day working on the project, and it had just like ups and downs, but I was able to communicate with, like, as you know, Chris, like we were all able to communicate with each other probably as much as in person. There was a little lag there because you have to wait for someone to stop talking before you can continue talking to someone else. So that's where there's like a bit of struggle, but I think we made the most of it. If anything, we kind of felt like prouder of this project that we did last year, weirdly enough, but it was difficult, definitely, but that's what you could expect from any competition in a worldwide pandemic. But it was fun in the end. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that we made the most of it, or did as much as we could with the situation. And I think that, it offers some sort of flexibility being virtual. If we were busy in some respect and we needed to do something else, then we could take the time to do that. When you're in Reno, Nevada, you're stuck in your hotel room and you have to keep working on it that whole time. So I think that there's like pros and cons too, kind of both ways of handling it. And then kind of just with like a final question to wrap up, is, do you think that there are some of those kinds of aspects of the virtual design competition that are going to stick with Sparks in the future, even when we go back into person?
Honestly, I kind of enjoyed the way they distributed the papers this year instead. So, like I said before, typically you'd have to run downstairs, get the papers, and then like put them onto a server, which was really confusing, and then come back downstairs to then submit the papers onto a server. But this year, all you had to do was like open Microsoft Teams and then drag the file out, download it. And then once you were done completing it, then you just dragged your file into the folder. And I thought that was so simple, like a lot easier than previous years. So I can't say for sure if they're going to implement something like that, but I kind of hope so, instead of making us figure out how to deal with the server and all that stuff. And also, like, it would help students get their information in on time because you don't have to consider the travel time of running downstairs. So hopefully that's something that they would stick with. And then maybe even having like, of course, having the career fair in person, but maybe having another separate session virtually for any students who would want to go to it. Yeah, so then like I think the virtual thing is a lot about is accessibility. Like in a case where you typically wouldn't be able to meet someone in person, you would have to do it virtually. And like this way, it's kind of showing everyone that that is a possibility. Like not everything definitely has to be in person. There's ways to adapt. So I think that would be a good addition as well.
Yeah, I think those are all really great additions. I think hopefully they'll learn from this that like it's great to have everything in person. There's big draws to it, but there's also ways that they can make things more convenient with the virtual platform. And hopefully they can maybe listen to Sparks chairs in the future from CMAs across the country and maybe get some feedback on it.
Yeah, that would definitely be great. I know we work really closely with coaches now, but being able to work in person too will be really nice.
It would be nice to go back to Reno. Yeah, that was a lot of fun when we went.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, thank you so much, Natalie, for taking the time to talk to me today and for talking about Sparks. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I love to share my experiences.
Welcome back to the Viterbi Voices podcast. Last time I talked to Natalie about the AACE Design Build competition, and then today we're going to be talking to Shannon about the MEPC competition. Hi, Shannon. How are you?
Hey, Chris. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm also great. Good to hear it. So before we start getting into, virtual design competitions and MEPC, I thought we could start with an introduction from you.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Shannon Brownlee. I'm currently a sophomore here at USC. I'm a double major in computer science and quantitative biology, and I'm from San Diego, California.
Fantastic. Okay. So I kind of wanted to start with a general description of MEPC. Do you think you could kind of give us a summary of what the competition entails, what kind of you're producing and kind of like the timeline of it?
Yeah, for sure. So MEPC stands for the Maseeh Entrepreneurship Prize Competition. It's kind of this competition within the USC Viterbi Innovation Institute, where they have a bunch of teams that are competing and learning how to pitch better and develop their business model. So it all starts with an idea. It's more for people who already have an idea that they've started to develop and really just want that kind of mentorship and advisement from seasoned professors and people in the industry to help them really gain their footing and prepare themselves to get funding from other sources. And so within that, we've had a lot of meetings about things like customer discovery, business model development, financial planning. And then the timeline for the competition is from about December till April. So it's been about every 3 weeks or so, there's a workshop that we work on, and we meet probably about once every 2 weeks with our mentors to discuss everything and keep them updated.
That's super cool. And in terms of your specific project, are you allowed to, get into it at all?
Yeah, for sure. So what my co-founder and I have done is we've started to develop a product that allows you to read in audio data through a phone or a smartwatch, and then using a machine learning model, It translates this audio data into an emotion that's being expressed by the speaker. So if I'm speaking in like a surprised way, then it'll translate this into surprised in our machine learning model, and then feed this back to a haptic wristband. So either the Neosensory Buzz wristband, which is what we've been working with recently, or we're working on an Apple Watch version as well. It feeds these as unique vibrations that a user can memorize so that they can figure out the emotional sentiment of whoever is speaking to them. This is particularly useful for neurodivergent populations, people with autism, alexithymia, ADHD, etc.
Wow, that is super cool.
Thank you.
Kind of bringing the discussion towards COVID-19 and the transition to the virtual, I was wondering, how do you think the competition had to change or adapt to the virtual platform?
Yeah, it was definitely a big change, I'd say, for a lot of the people running it. Most of them are professors who've been teaching for a long time and are very particular about what they do. But overall, I think it was actually positive for the competition to be virtual. I hope they continue it this way into the future, just because it makes it so much easier on everyone involved to be able to be home and to be able to be other places throughout the competition as a whole. Because like I said, it's about 4 or 5 months long, depending on how far you make it into the finals and semifinals. And you're expected to have these meetings every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. And a lot of them have all the teams there for workshops and stuff. And so if it were in person, we would all have had to be in LA over winter break, in LA, constantly going to these meetings. And especially when you have class going on and other extracurriculars, it's a lot easier to just be able to run from one meeting to the next on Zoom rather than having to sprint across campus or go to like a second location. So it's definitely a lot easier on, I think, both the teams and the mentors who volunteer their time to do it. Because again, it's just time out of their own day that they're willing to help out these small co-founders with. And so it just overall is a simpler platform. It does make it a little bit more difficult for some of the like pitches and presentations just because of technical difficulties, but that's to be expected with a new platform. But yeah, overall, I think it's remained mostly the same. The biggest difference, I'd say, in any way that they're running the competition is just in their customer discovery portion of it. They usually encourage people to travel a little bit and talk to possible customers and give you funding for that. But right now, that's not really possible. So it's a little bit harder to do that portion of it, but the rest of it runs pretty well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I definitely think that the virtual platform does offer more kind of flexibility in terms of hours or, being able to, like you said, hop on a Zoom call just at a moment's notice. So would you say that then you think that your team has been doing better with the virtual platform? Do you think it actually has improved the situation for your team?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably improved our situation overall. We actually started after everything went virtual and after COVID started. So we never really had that in-person portion of our business plan and how we worked. But even when we have been in person, we did quarantine together for a little while, my business partner and I. And it doesn't really make a huge difference in the work we do. Since I'm more on the software side, it is easier to make everything virtual. So sharing code's easier, making sure everyone has access to it. We do hop on Zoom calls about 3 times a week to discuss different things, but it's definitely a little bit easier to do that than to have to constantly meet up and do other things of that sort. I will say it was difficult at first to test our stuff because we only had one wristband that we could connect our app to. But now that we've had a little bit more funding, we've been able to get one for each of us. So that definitely makes it a little easier.
Yeah, definitely. That's good. I'm sure that one wristband was probably pretty hard. Would you have to like ship it to each other and like take turns or?
Well, we did that once. we we shipped it to each other once. The other time, my business partner has to come down to LA every few months for various family things. And so while she was here, it was just a quick like handoff of here, you get to deal with it now.
Okay. So your business partner, I know that you mentioned that she's currently taking a semester off and she doesn't live in LA.
Yeah, she was a friend of mine from my freshman year dorms. We lived right across the hall from each other. And so she was the one who actually reached out to me with like a developer competition hackathon kind of thing, because she knew that I did a lot of AI, especially in the bio field. And she studies computational neuroscience, so she had a connection to this neuroscience researcher who founded a company, Neosensory. And so we've been a team pretty much ever since she reached out to me about that competition, and that's where this all started.
That's awesome. So then, kind of as like a final overall question is, do you think that this idea of kind of maintaining like a hybrid between in-person and virtual is something that you would want MEPC to be doing moving forward?
For sure. I definitely think it makes it a lot easier on everyone involved to not have to be there in person. And it gives you a lot more freedom with who can be mentors to the teams, because they can be all across the US. Some people are out of the country as well. And it gives you this breadth of knowledge that you might not have had initially if you just made it a lot of people in LA. And as far as time commitment goes, it's still a big commitment, but having it be more flexible with virtual meetings and different hours, it's a little bit more feasible for students to be involved in the competition while still being in class. There are a lot of PhD students and master's students who have less rigorous schedules than undergrads as far as like class times go. So I'd say it's a good idea for them to be able to do it hybrid. I think that maybe the like final pitch competitions or something like that could be in person, and maybe a couple of the meetings that are a little bit more important to have that in-person aspect, like interview practice. But other than that, I think overall, keeping this design competition virtual would be the best bet for the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I think that it is a really good idea to kind of produce a hybrid, just because there are some aspects that, you know, COVID has made us realize are better to do virtually. It just makes it easier for both the people involved and the students that are participating in the competition. I also didn't even think of that, the fact that you could bring in mentors from, you know, across the world or across the country. So that's really fantastic. Well, great, Shannon. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for telling us about MEPC.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. I'm so happy to share my experiences and my work.
Awesome. And thanks so much, Chris, for this episode. I think one of the most exciting sort of opportunities Viterbi offers are these design competitions, and they range from really every major has one that works, or ones that work across majors. So I think it's awesome to highlight these competitions. One thing I'm curious about, what's like, I know you talked to a bunch of people, what was like the most valuable takeaway they had from the design competitions?
I definitely think that it was, when I was going to ask them if they wanted to return into the in-person, I kind of assumed that it would just be like a yes. Like, I absolutely want this competition to be fully in person, but there was a little bit of kind of a give and take with it. Some people, really obviously needed to be in person. Like, for example, I talked to someone who worked with the Make-A-Thon, they need 3D printers, but she mentioned that they were able to do meetings with different kinds of mentors from across the country. And because of that, they were able to have a lot more communication with people that they normally wouldn't be able to if it wasn't done virtually. So there's kind of pros and cons to both the virtual and the in-person. So the hybrid idea was a lot more, there was a better response to it than I thought.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think definitely this idea of combining what we were forced into with Zoom calls is is something that I think we're all looking into. I know that we're excited about how many walls have been torn down about like getting a meeting with somebody or talking to somebody. It's so much easier these days, and we don't need to worry about like being in person because we can have a valuable meeting. I think right before we started recording, you two were talking about something like this, right?
Yeah, kind of just on the same topic. Chris and I were sort of chatting about this episode, and I definitely can speak to that in my own experience too. I think I've mentioned this before, but a couple of my friends and I are doing a couple of these design competitions this year, and definitely to highlight these are not something I knew a lot about as a freshman. So now as a senior, Dominie and I were actually like, this is on our USC bucket list, so we have to do it. But one thing that we're in the Min Family Challenge and then the ABC Innovation Prize competitions, and they emphasize customer discovery. So having interviews with potential customers, and we've been able to interview people kind of all over the country rather than just sort of local in the area, because we've done them all over Zoom or over the phone. So I definitely think that's a real phenomenon, that the virtual, kind of the default virtual, gives you more access to people, which is great.
Very cool. How are you two holding up? I know it's kind of it's a rough, long semester, and it's definitely not perfect or what anyone would want if they designed it. But how's it going?
Yeah, I think for me, kind of in the same vein as what Chris was saying when we spoke at the beginning, I think last semester was definitely a little more of an adjustment to sort of really learn how to do school fully online. I know we did that a little bit last spring, but this was the first time where our classes started online last semester. So this semester, I do think I have a little more of a schedule for myself and have kind of gotten into the swing of it. And I think too, we're starting to have a little more access to campus, which I'm really excited about. Like our tennis courts are open, our libraries are starting to open up. So I think that'll be a fun way to just sort of feel a little more connected to everyone, hopefully in a safe way. So I'm looking forward.
Yeah, we got these new tents on campus. Have you guys used them at all or seen them?
I haven't used them, but I've seen them before. And it's definitely exciting that things are gradually starting to open up. Feel a little bit more connected to campus.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging time because everybody definitely wants to be done, and everybody starts to feel like we can see the finish line and we're just not there yet. And so I know it's an increasingly frustrating time, but we're almost there. But anyway, all right, y'all. Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for bringing this out. Really appreciate it. And for all of you listening, we will see you again real soon. Bye-bye.